Welcome, curious soul, to Tales of the Tattered Book. I am your host, the keeper of the book. With each passing moment, new horrors appear on these weathered pages, yearning to be told. As I open this arcane tome, remember, knowledge comes at a price, and some truths are better left unspoken. The Tattered Book shows us something ancient tonight, its pages brittle with age and stained with darker substances than mere ink. We journey back to the First Crusade, where faith and fanaticism blur beneath the merciless Anatolian sun. But this is not a tale of holy conquest. Rather, it chronicles how devotion can become perversion and how some relics were meant to remain forever buried. Steel yourselves for the Horned Grail.
For weeks, they had marched under the merciless sun. 20 of Christendom's finest knights, led by the ambitious Tancredi d'Altavilla, pushed eastward. Among them, Fulbert, a lowly squire, tended to the horses and men. Fulbert's skin, once pale as milk, now bore angry red welts from the sun's assault. Yet even as his flesh suffered, his spirit soared. Each step brought them closer to their divine purpose. Every day, as the sun reached its zenith, Fulbert would pause in his duties to offer prayer, his lilting Scottish accent carrying across the scorched earth. He would speak of God's grace, of their holy mission, of Jerusalem's promise of salvation. Little did he know that Jerusalem was not their true destination. Tancredi's eyes were fixed on a point east of Antioch, guided by whispered directions from a mysterious Moorish guide. 5 days of harsh travel brought them to Seyahatar, where Tancredi spent long hours in hushed conversation with the village elder and the guide. Fulbert noticed how the old villager's hands trembled as he drew a crude map in the sand, how his eyes darted fearfully toward the distant mountains. When the elder made the sign of the cross, not in the Latin manner, but in some older fashion, Fulbert felt the first stirrings of unease in his faithful heart. The next morning, they pressed deeper into the wilderness, following their guide's unwavering certainty toward a distant rock formation. As dusk approached, storm clouds gathered with unnatural speed, roiling black masses that seemed to pursue them across the desert sky. The guide's urgency grew with each passing moment, his words becoming a stream of muttered prayers in a tongue Fulbert had never heard before. Soon, the heavens opened with biblical fury, turning the desert to treacherous mud. They barely managed to secure their horses before seeking shelter in the cave's mouth. As the last man crossed the threshold, a thunder cracked like God's own fury, and the entrance collapsed in a shower of rock and debris. Their party stood trapped within the mountain's stony embrace, the sound of falling rocks giving way to an oppressive silence. Tancredi called for calm, his voice echoing against the stone walls. But something in his tone, a note of triumph rather than concern, sent a chill down Fulbert's spine. As the knights lit their torches, the Moorish guide smiled in the flickering light, an expression that spoke not of fear, but of anticipation.
Fear not, as we are where we need to be. Now we must press on and find what we came for.
Days passed in the darkness of the cave, each hour marked only by the dwindling of their torch supplies and the growing desperation in their prayers. As provisions ran low, Tancredi divided their group. Half would work to clear the cave-in, while the others, including Fulbert, would explore deeper into the mountain's belly, ostensibly seeking another exit. But Fulbert saw how Tancredi's eyes gleamed in the torchlight when he spoke of what they might discover in the depths. Their descent led them through passages that seemed too regular to be natural, past walls where ancient marks suggested human hands had shaped the stone. Fulbert's fingers traced symbols carved into the rock, not the blessed cross of their faith, but older signs that made his skin crawl, and his prayers stick in his throat. At last, they came upon a door of ancient wood, its surface blackened by time. But it was what surrounded the door that made Fulbert's blood run cold. Yellowed pages had been nailed to the stone frame, fragments of scripture forming a barrier against what lay beyond. Among Latin prayers and Greek testimonials, one word appeared again and again: demon. Some of the pages bore the distinctive red ink of church documents, while others seemed written in liquid Fulbert dared not contemplate. Tancredi approached the door with reverence, but not the kind befitting a Christian knight. Slowly, he removed his gauntlets and grazed the surface of one of the scroll with sinuous fingers, lust and greed in his twinkling eyes. When he ordered the men to tear down the holy barriers, his voice trembled with barely contained excitement. Fulbert watched in horror as his fellow Christians ripped away the sacred words that had stood guard for centuries. Each torn page felt like a betrayal of their faith, every crumpled scripture another step toward damnation. The door opened with a sound like a dying man's last breath, and the party entered the room. Their source light flickered and waned as they stepped into the chamber, struggling against the stagnant air filled with the smell of ancient decay mingled with a sickly sweet aroma, reminiscent of incense mixed with decaying meat. Their footsteps reverberated off stone floors worn smooth by countless processions over the years. As they lifted their torches higher, the unsteady light unveiled walls adorned with frescoes that made Fulbert bite his tongue hard enough to draw blood. Depicted was the Last Supper, but reimagined as a gruesome banquet of human flesh, each apostle shown in horrific detail as they devoured raw meat with bare hands and bloodied teeth. The face of Christ had been replaced with a horned figure, its features exuding such intentional malice that Fulbert had to avert his eyes. At the chamber's heart stood an altar of black stone, its surface stained dark brown with the evidence of countless rituals. The stone itself seemed to weep a greasy moisture that caught the torchlight like pools of oil. Upon it sat what Tancredi called the Grail, though it bore no resemblance to the cup of Christ. This chalice was fashioned from human bone, yellowed with age and carved with symbols that made Fulbert's eyes water. The cup's rim was lined with teeth, methodically extracted and arranged in a pattern that spoke of careful, patient madness. Behind the altar loomed a figure that drew their horrified gazes. The idol stood twice the height of a man, crafted from desiccated human remains. Its crown of thorns was decorated with tiny skulls that Fulbert realized, with mounting horror, belonged to infants. The idol's chest had been carved open like a reliquary, displaying preserved organs arranged in unnatural configurations. Beside this blasphemy lay a book bound in leather that bore too close a resemblance to human skin. Upon opening it, Tancredi was met with a foul odor of ancient blood and rot, causing several knights to retch. Its illustrations depicted acts of such intentional wickedness that Fulbert felt his faith wavering merely by looking at them. The Latin text appeared to be inscribed in what could only be blood, with letters crafted meticulously, indicating that the creator found immense satisfaction in their work. As Tancredi held the book aloft, Fulbert noticed movement in the idol's hollow chest. Rats, he prayed, just rats. But when one of the small skulls shifted in the torchlight, its empty socket seeming to fix upon him, Fulbert knew with terrible certainty that no servant of God had created this place. Sir Edmund's rosary dripped blood onto the stone floor. Whether from his white-knuckled grip or from the beads themselves, Fulbert couldn't tell. The aging knight lunged suddenly toward the bone chalice, his intention clear in his wild eyes. But before he could reach it, Tancredi's hand closed around his wrist with unnatural speed. That same beatific smile still played across their commander's face as he ordered the knights to carefully pack the unholy book and several smaller artifacts into their saddlebags. When 3 knights refused, backing away while making the sign of the cross, Tancredi merely smiled. That smile, Fulbert would later recall, marked the moment their party truly divided, between those who would embrace this new, terrible faith and those who would die clinging to the old. Days turned to weeks in the suffocating darkness. As supplies dwindled, Fulbert watched the changes come over his companions. Those loyal to Tancredi seemed to grow stronger despite their hunger, gathering nightly in the blasphemous chamber. Their whispered prayers were not to the god of their fathers. The others grew weaker, their faces gaunt with starvation. Fulbert noticed how those who decided to not bend the knee to Tancredi's madness began to disappear one by one. Each morning, another bedroll lay empty. Tancredi's followers claimed they had wandered deeper into the caves, seeking escape. But Fulbert saw how they licked their fingers clean at meals, how they carried strips of salted meat, despite their provisions having run out days ago. The meat was too red, too fresh. When Cedric challenged Fulbert about the claims he made against their leader, the loyal knight's breath already had the metallic tang of raw flesh. Fulbert noticed in his friend's eyes not only a craving, but a dreadful acknowledgement of their transformation. That evening, as Fulbert crouched in his corner, gripping his cross tightly, he heard them approaching. The flickering torchlight cast their shadows as towering figures on the cave walls, and their hushed chants were about nourishment, not redemption. On the 6th week, a hand thrust out from the mud blocking the cave's entrance, followed by an arm clad in mud-caked chainmail. The opening widened, and Tancredi emerged into the light of day. Despite the time trapped underground, he appeared unnaturally hale, his bearing strong and assured. One by one, his knights followed, their armor stained, but their bodies showing no signs of the privation they should have endured. They returned to Seyahatar, where Tancredi's coin bought the village's assistance without question. The next day, a procession of wagons and horses made its way to the cave. The knights supervised carefully as their cargo was loaded, items wrapped in thick cloth that no one was allowed to examine. When they departed, Tancredi left behind more gold than the village had seen in a generation.
To Nicaea, my brothers. The true crusade awaits.
The cave remained silent for 3 days before curiosity drove some villagers to explore. What they found in those depths would haunt them until their dying days. Fulbert's remains lay atop a carpet of gnawed bones, what was left of the faithful knights and the villagers who had helped clear the cave. Most had been stripped to the bone, their marrow sucked dry, their skulls cracked open to access what lay within. In a corner, chained to the wall, they found Sir Edmund. His hair had gone white, his mind clearly shattered. He babbled endlessly about feasts and faith, about a new communion of flesh and blood. But it was his eyes that struck the deepest terror. They held the same haunted reverence they had seen in Tancredi's gaze.
Today's lecture covers one of the First Crusade's most controversial figures, Tancredi d'Altavilla, who emerges in historical records in 1095 following Pope Urban II's call to arms.
The lecture hall's lights dim as images of medieval manuscripts appear on the screen. The professor's voice takes on a more serious tone.
What makes Tancredi fascinating isn't just his military achievements, but a curious gap in historical records. In early 1098, he and a group of knights disappeared in Anatolia for several weeks. When they rejoined the Crusader army at Nicaea, witnesses noted changes.
She pauses, bringing up contemporary accounts.
The siege of Jerusalem in 1099 marks a turning point. Even in an era of religious warfare, Tancredi's actions stood out for their brutality. The massacre at Al-Aqsa Mosque was unprecedented, systematic rather than chaotic. Survivors described it not as typical warfare, but as something closer to ritual sacrifice.
The next slide shows architectural plans of a Paris stronghold.
Upon returning to France, Tancredi established the Order of the Righteous Flame. Recent archaeological excavations of their headquarters have uncovered disturbing evidence. Bone fragments showing signs of ritualistic cannibalism, hidden chambers with artifacts that suggest practices far removed from Christian doctrine.
The professor clicks to an image of a partially burned manuscript.
The Knights Templar destroyed most records when they purged the order in 1126, but fragments survive, hinting at what drove the church to such decisive action. The most interesting document, discovered just last year, mentions a cave in Anatolia and something called the Horned Grail. The official historical record ends with Tancredi's death in 1126. However, 3 weeks ago, an archaeological team in Turkey uncovered a sealed cave. Inside, they found human remains showing evidence of ritualistic cannibalism. Carbon dating places them at approximately 1098. The cave has since been resealed under Vatican authority.
The lights come up as students gather their things.
Next week, we'll discuss the early formation of the Knights Templar. And please, stick to the assigned readings. I've had to reject 3 papers attempting to link Tancredi to modern conspiracy theories.
As the students file out, she glances at her phone, another email from the Vatican's historical archive, marked urgent. She deletes it without reading.
And so, dear listeners, we come to the end of this story of sacred vows turned into a fierce hunger. Although the Church may have removed much of Tancredi's legacy from its official records, evil imprints more than just words on paper. If you dare to delve deeper into these eldritch mysteries, subscribe to our podcast, leave a rating and review, and whisper of our tales to others. Your engagement feeds the book, fueling the terrors yet to come. Until next time, and may your nights be sleepless and your dreams unsettling.